Have you noticed that today we've been talking about the business of content? It's the end result is not what you write, but what it's used for. What does it accomplish? What does it do for your organization and your users, or customers, as I prefer to call them? So to start out and continue this discussion, now we bring on a good friend, Joe Gollner from Gnostics Research, who's going to talk about just that. And a quick note here, Joe's going to go a little over 20 minutes, and then Jackie's going to start immediately after. Over to you, Joe.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to share my screen.
I remember that LavaCon.
I know. It even very conveniently provides us the date in the background there. So I think that was Las Vegas.
Okay, over to you.
Okay. So this will be a whirlwind. So I was let know over the weekend that I have a little extra time. So rather than just sort of expand one talk, I've created two talks, of course. And this image sort of gives us a forewarning of what persona Joe will adopt for the first one. And then we're going to swing wildly over to a different persona, also a bald character, of course. But we will see. I'll keep that a secret until it comes. So this would be New Orleans at this time of year, right about now in normal times. And so I was pondering that and feeling a little down about not being in New Orleans, but we're going to make do. And this particular image reminded me of Jack Skellington, of course. And sort of following a sort of path of random association, that got me thinking about, of all things, no surprise, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Tim Burton's great 1993 movie. And this, in turn, made me think about, of course, 1993. And, of course, the SGML conference in Boston in 1993, in December, early December 1993. And as the conference wrapped up, there was a couple of us all headed out, and we just happened to find a cinema playing A Nightmare Before Christmas. So in we went, and a strange choice, but somehow I was drawn to it. And so it was a long, long time ago, 27 years ago. So we have Jack Skellington, as we saw in the very opening slide, one of my alter egos, one of my many bald alter egos. And we have here Jack talking to himself, which I do a lot of, I guess. And ruminating on his state. He's a little bit down in the dumps. It's a bit of an existential crisis for Jack. And thinking about basically his place in the world. And this is important. So something was a little, and I'm remembering back to SGML 1993, it was a funny time. There was a lot of excitement, if you can believe it. Yeah, there was a lot of excitement in the nerdy world of the standard generalized markup language, SGML. We did have a sense of purpose at the time. We thought that really our mission was to unlock the world's knowledge so that everybody could access it. So we sort of felt that finally our day in the sun was coming. And but there was also a nagging concern that, quote unquote, the party was elsewhere. The web was being born, and what was maybe forgotten nowadays is that, of course, the web, it was quite constructively understood as an early SGML application. Horror of horrors. So we thought, well, can't we be part of can't we jump into this party? Let's get in there. There's something big is happening. Let's join the party. So let's do that. So in SGML 1996, also in Boston, we saw the release of the proposed recommendation, XML recommendation for the W3C. And what was interesting about that is that it was very clear that the web, quote unquote, needed us. They really did need us. They didn't like the fact that they still needed us. A lot of them like to pretend that they had never heard of SGML and never had any dealings with it, although the fingerprints of SGML and the HTML TTD were everywhere. So we were very excited. We were still excited. We figured, yep, our time in the sun is coming. We are going to be so popular. And this is something we hear from Jack Skellington all the time. So we set to work. We grabbed our book about the scientific method. Early content engineers jumped at the task of how do we make, basically a new version of SGML, a new leaner SGML, which came by the name of XML, that would basically solve some of the problems that the web was encountering as it exploded in popularity. So we actually did bring a lot to the web. It was not fully appreciated at the time, and it is almost entirely forgotten now, but we really did. The construction of XML, an extensible markup language for encoding data patterns and not just HTML pages, bailed out the web. It allowed the web to continue to evolve. Just as in the original SGML days, that they had adopted SGML in the very, very first days of the web, when it was still nowhere but CERN, the lab on the French-Swiss border. They adopted it, and they found that accidentally they suddenly had the ability to encode different languages, for example, which was just sort of a delightful surprise. It turned out the whole software industry had gotten themselves into a pickle. And in fact, XML as well, under the name of XML Web Services, provided a way out, provided a lightweight mechanism for inter-application messaging. And again, not appreciated at the time, not by and large forgotten now. It made a huge impact. It basically got the software industry out of a self-imposed knots. We had sort of forgotten a little bit about our roots, which were documentation and publishing. That's what SGML was born originally to do, was to help us manage what we know and to publish it more effectively. And so we thought, well, we should really try and get back to that. So that was the next thing. Yet more content engineering energy applied to, okay, we can figure this out. We can basically come up with a better way to do documentation. And now we have the gift of XML at our disposal. What helped the web, what helped the software industry, we could use ourselves to, basically engender the next generation of content ecosystem. We can do something here. As an aside, this formula that Jack has, this sort of crazy formula, pseudo math formula that equals Christmas, turns up in lots of places. It's wildly popular. So, this is where I say that the outcome of this exercise was DITA, the Darwin Information Typing Architecture, a modular, reusable, omni-channel content sort of platform, an application standard too. It likes to pretend that it isn't, but it is, and that the open toolkit, the open source shared solution part is a full and equal partner to what we call the standard. And that's what made it, in its little world, it made it quite popular. And so what we succeeded at doing is creating what we'll call a micro market. From a business perspective, a micro market, a very, very specialized space in which, DITA, some open source tools, and a cluster of relatively small companies could assemble together to sort of do documentation better. So we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. So I'll say it's maybe 2005 or so on. We were really quite full of ourselves, and quite confident we were going to be really, really popular. And I find this picture interesting because Jack is, of course, all dressed up as Santa. He's ready to go to a different kind of holiday. He's ready to go. He's stoked. Feels great about himself. In the background, we see Sally, who is not quite so sure about things. And in some ways, she is the touchstone. She is sort of like the connection to reality, to the truth. And that's worrisome that she's not feeling entirely thrilled about the situation. But on our side, we're ready for the big leagues. The enterprise needs us. We engage prospects, customers, users. As we, no doubt we'll hear many times in this conference, and we've heard over the years at many prior LavaCons, including from me, the different good things we can do with better documentation, better digital documentation. We can build satisfaction, we can generate sales, we can save people some money. There's all, no end to the good that we can do. These are all part of the story that we by and large tell to ourselves, and on which we build our own sort of a sense of satisfaction and confidence. So if this is all so positive, why so serious? Why is Sally not nonplussed, as we'd say? She's concerned, and I think rightly so. Is there something missing? Something we've forgotten? And one of the early songs in The Nightmare Before Christmas has Jack basically asking that question: have we missed something? There's something we've forgotten. Well, it turns out that even after, setting up to basically reinvent Christmas, have Halloween take over, hijack Christmas, Sally knows that something's just not right. Something's missing. And it's the one thing that the enterprise really needs. That's what we're missing, and that's integration. Again, there was a time in the enterprise architecture and software industry where enterprise integration was one of the big phrases. And it's sort of understood to be a huge challenge, especially the bigger the enterprise becomes. But it has a huge communication dimension. Enterprise integration isn't just about getting the databases to aggregate effectively. It's much more than that. It comes down to better communication. So as I did in my talk last year, a virtual visit to LavaCon, and a talk called The Economics of Content, or I think at the time I sort of suggested it was the failed economics of content. We've managed to create a silo, and this has been one of my themes over the last year, is that we've created a silo. We've built a little stovepipe, and we're not alone. They've done the same in Marcom, in marketing communications, in sort of user experience content, sort of basically what we'll call web content strategy, business communications even. Everybody has sort of managed to create a little silo. We're probably most at default in the TechCom world, because in fact, our toolkit and our mission was born with integration, basically connecting internationally distributed teams of projects, which was what Tim Berners-Lee had set out as the initial mission for his prototype web. So we've managed to create a silo that actively works against the free flow of communication within the enterprise. In fact, we've done the one thing that we should not have done. So in my talk last year, I said basically, and it was all themed around Toy Story, I said basically, it's your fault, Joe. So I accepted full blame for the predicament. So this is a bit shocking. This is suboptimal. This is exactly what happens in The Nightmare Before Christmas. They take over Christmas. They eagerly, desperately want to be loved. They want to make Christmas a great thing, but of course they are from Halloween. So what they think is great turns out to be scary. And it goes badly. So as Korg says in Thor Ragnarok, bit of a disaster, that one. And in some ways, and we could take the big snake here to be sort of a big TechCom silo with specialized toolkit, using DITA, using a CMS, but basically not fully or not well integrated with basically anything else. This is a suboptimal outcome. This is not getting us closer to the answer. So this is a picture actually from my study, which is just around the corner here. You'd say, do you think I'm exaggerating? Well, I have a whole batch of new gizmos from HP, and I like their stuff. I've always liked HP stuff, all the way back to my original scientific calculator in high school, where, self-identifying as a math nerd, the true math nerds hung on their belt an HP calculator, and that some of us even moved up to programmable HP calculators, which were just weird, but awesomely fun. Anyway, I got a whole bunch of new stuff, a smart hub, a fancy pants monitor, all kinds of good stuff, all supposed to magically talk together. And they don't. They do not. And this is highly frustrating. And what I found doubly frustrating was the documentation was abysmal. So as I call it here, in a docs-free zone. And typically I have sort of an editorial policy where I try not to rant and say bad things. It's kind of like what your mother always said: if you don't have something nice, don't say anything at all. Well, I'm breaking my own editorial rule because I was so angry, that the things didn't talk well together. These tools, all brand new, almost like marketed or positioned as being able to sort of connect everything together. And I consciously bought all HP things, saying, well, if anyone's made things work together, it'll be HP. But no, turns out not. And the docs-free zone is a reference to the fact that there is no documentation, as far as I've been able to find so far, about integrating the different pieces together to do something useful as a whole. Worse, when you phone in or you interact with their chatbot, they've got lots of the technology all working off taxonomies that actually have no place in them for the unity of multiple products working together. It just does not compute. And then when you get to an individual product like the Smart Hub, you get down to a PDF, which in this case isn't there. It's a 404 error. So, not happy. So I said, well, after all this, and this is, HP used to be a customer, to be honest, and I knew from the inside just how good, particularly around the printers, how good their information. We used to use it as a case study of how things should be done. And here we've arrived at the time when they've become the anti-pattern. Sorry, HP. Sorry. So we, crash and burn, as happens in the movie. Jack gets shot down. As people say, this is not the Christmas we were looking forward to. And his refrain is, what have I done? So again, accepting the blame, I'm saying to myself, what have I done? Echoing Apocalypse Now and Marlon Brando, the horror, the horror. This is not the party we were hoping for. This is probably not the message you were hoping for. This seems rather bleak. It's a suboptimal situation. The future is marching on, and then the question that's nagging at me and should be nagging us: are we being left behind? Is there any hope? So what happens in the movie is instructive. Jack, in this cemetery where he's crashed, has a revelation and realizes he has to get back to doing what he's good at, which is Halloween. And in returning to sort of the basics, to an original mission, we see a pathway to redemption and to a better answer. So we can learn from the history. Even and all these pieces that have been so energetically forgotten, we can learn from them if we take the time to dig them back up and actually look at them. The enterprise needs to improve how it communicates now more than ever. COVID, if nothing else, has demonstrated categorically how important communication is for the enterprise to do anything, to offer a product, a service. to engage with its customers, to get them to pony up some funds and then be happy with what they have received. So we do need to find a better song, as it were. So back to the basics of communication. The digital enterprise, as everybody was being pushed unceremoniously to become, thanks to COVID, needs to be able to communicate. And when you think about it, it's actually communication in a variety of directions, many of which we really don't give much attention to, including the first one. How does a prospect, how do potential customers inform your design? It's kind of like the ear to the ground side of marketing. How do you learn from the requirements that are emerging, that are not here yet? How does design speak to development? And so on and so on, and ones we're familiar with. How does sales talk to prospects or support to users? When we really think about the enterprise, we're thinking about everyone to everyone. So we have to jump into the game, and the stakes are high. It's like Mr. Oogie Boogie and the Wheel of Fortune. The stakes are high. So we have to get back into the game, and we've learned a lot. We've, over all these years, and we can look in TechCom, Marcom, business communications, and say we've been refining individual pieces that we can pull together to make for a response, an integrated response. We just haven't put them together yet. So Jack suddenly realizes that where what he's been looking for, searching for, has been in front of him all this time. And then to sort of paraphrase T.S. Eliot, we've returned to where we started from, and now we can see it for the first time. The enterprise is nothing but communication and the connections between people. And we can use our tools to do this better. And I've been doing, as some know, a lot of management studies around the world. What's interesting is managers, the executives, are being deeply immersed in these very points. So when we think that we're not getting the ear of the executive C-suite, then we're missing something, because when they go out to be trained, to be made into better executives, what they learn about, ironically, is communication. So we can build better connections between people and between sort of what we do and the truth, the reality. And that's Sally's role in all this. So that's the end of this first presentation. I'm going to charge straight into the second one. And just a pause so we transition. This is Hatley Castle right here in Victoria, British Columbia. It's famous from being Mutant High in the X-Men. It's also Luthor Manor in Smallville. It's where Lex Luthor lives. It's also, interestingly, my grandfather, Mad Jack Mackenzie, was approached by the government to take it over and saying, well, do you want it? He said, no way, it looks like a money pit. And the president of, it's now Royal Roads University, the president of Royal Roads University said, well, if you're in a seance with your grandfather, just tell him he was right. It's a money pit. So I too studied there for a little while. Yeah, a great, beautiful place to come visit someday here in Victoria. So a second presentation, mark my words, the mechanics of content. And we have Deadpool, and you'll never know, because there's a mask, if whether I'm under the mask or not. So we're going to change. So from sort of the meditative and reflective Jack Skellington and The Nightmare Before Christmas, we're going to just get, hopefully not too inappropriate, but we're going to follow Deadpool. And just like there were similar associations before, what connects us to Deadpool is Hatley Castle, where of course he too is a resident, sometime resident, and then where they shoot a lot of the scenes from the Deadpool movies. So coming out of the previous presentation where we said, okay, we've got to do things better, we have to do things different, you're going, okay, Joe, what exactly should we do? Well, you asked for it. So myself and Deadpool are going to work on, communicating just that. So we have a framework. We're going to look at a framework, understanding content ecosystems. We're going to look at some of the concepts. We're going to look at a design pattern of how these things can be put together to actually work in a real enterprise. And briefly, a particular, we'll call it methodology pattern, a way of learning to improve. So as you can guess, here's Deadpool hanging out in Vancouver, just across the way from where I am now. And he's all about the documentation. He's got a plan. He's done his illustration. He knows what he's going to do. So over the last little while, I've been revisiting some of my historical models, which I've shared at prior LavaCons going back many years now. And this is the latest one, whereas Deadpool says, you know, money shot. This is the one. And we've got it right now. And it's basically a way of saying, well, we've heard of these different concepts: content strategy, content engineering, content operations, and the specific activities that go on. Like, you know, how do these things all fit together? So what we have here is content strategy, setting the agenda in effect, and then driving how we design the content, how we acquire it, and maybe it's how we write it, maybe how we license it, how we convert it from the dustbins and archives in the back room. And then how do we deliver it? How are people going to consume it? Is it going to go into a voice assistant? Is it going to go provide nuggets that will be the first thing that your chatbot tosses up as, hey, maybe this is the answer you're looking for? Or however it needs to be delivered. And then evaluation. How do we bring back what we're learning? How is that content used? And how do we meter that usage so we can learn, adjust our design, and continue? So here is Deadpool going, zip it, Stanley. But maybe he's saying, is there a different way to visualize it, Joe? I'm not sure about that picture. Okay, so here it is. Same diagram, but seen from a different angle, a different perspective. So here we have it sort of laid out really as a kind of a meatless hamburger, say. We have content strategy as sort of on top. We have content engineering as the foundation or the mechanism, the support. And in the middle, we have content operations. You know, how does the content lifecycle, this sort of movement of between design, acquire, deliver, and evaluate, how does this work? And, you know, both guided by the strategy and sustained by the engineering. This is what we're seeking to do. And what I'm saying is we use these to enable content ecosystems. And that's a phrase that I'm also starting to use with much more frequency. So as Deadpool would probably say, define your terms, Voltaire, because of course Voltaire had famously said, if you're going to speak to me, first define your terms. So, okay. And this is me revisiting the definitions I've shared in the past. So first, content strategy, the what and why. A plan of action directed towards achieving a long-term business goal, through the acquisition and utilization of both content assets and ecosystems. And it's important that both are there. It's basically identifying some content assets that you're going to need doesn't get you very far unless you put in place the ecosystem that actually will bring those content assets to life and keep them fresh and evergreen and real. And that is a vital distinction. So the content strategy isn't just about what content you need. It's like literally, what's the best way for this content to come into being and to find its way to all the ways in which it can be used? Content engineering, I basically repurposed and revamped a little bit my own definition that I offered to XML Press's book, The Language of Content Strategy. So it's like the application of engineering discipline, and that there are present. If you go searching out there, there's a presentation I gave many years ago, okay, called So You Want to Be a Content Engineer, and it breaks it down in more detail. What does that really mean? But we're applying that discipline to the design, acquisition, delivery, evaluation, management, and use of content assets, and vitally, the ecosystems that enable the content lifecycle. So the and is again important. It's the content system, content assets, and the ecosystems in which they are going to live. Content operations is a phrase that has been, gaining great ground of late. Like with content strategy before it, and even content engineering even earlier, there's always a life, the universe, and everything kind of feel to it that, they say, well, this content operations covers everything. But in fact, it's best seen as a part of a tripartite or a triumvirate between content strategy, content engineering, and content operation. But operations are key because it's the who and when. It's basically the day-to-day activities and responsibilities that drive the content lifecycle. Literally, who's doing what and when are they doing it? And under sort of a continuous improvement regime, can they do it better? Can we do it better tomorrow? And finally, content ecosystem. It's a complex adaptive system, really. A complex environment in which the content lives, basically. It's important to start seeing things as a content ecosystem rather than a system or a solution or a CMS or whatever, because a content ecosystem immediately tries to convey the idea that it has to reflect, interact with, and sort of incorporate all aspects of the larger ecosystem in which it exists, the enterprise, the things the enterprise does, the responsibilities and how they're distributed within the enterprise, and critically, the technology investments that enterprise has and will make. So to quote John Donne, no, or paraphrase really, no content ecosystem is an island unto itself. They really are always interconnected. And we've had a bad habit of thinking about them as separate little stovepipes, little silos. So as Deadpool standing outside of Hatley Castle in Deadpool 2 would say, sounds good. What's it really look like? So here's what a content ecosystem looks like. And here's content ecosystems with kittens, of course. So this is really an I-0 diagram, perversely. And so
3-minute warning.
Yep. How many minute warning there, Jack?
3.
3? Okay.
Time flies when you're having fun.
You're an animal. Okay, good. All right. So we won't dwell on this, but basically it's a complex system where we have a variety of inputs. Strategy and operations are like controls. And that the content engineering is a supporting mechanism. And that we can basically run through a wave, prototyping, implementation, model implementation, production, continuous is a cycle that works very well. This is the key slide. We need to get our rhetorical agency on. We have to help people be like Deadpool and Celine Dion. We have to get authors working in a way where they have a tactile feel for the way that content will be delivered. And if we can do that, we can actually harvest that content and use it in many ways, but it's rhetorical agency is your word for today. Sounds great. I have a question. This sounds, like it may not be all that new. It's not all that new, but we're really looking to harvest the investments we have under our separate silos and use appreciative inquiry to look at the good things we can use to bring it together. It partly means using the gift of XML a little bit more intelligently than we have. Keep it wrapped up and in the back a little bit. We can use it, but it's not the center. It's like, oh my goodness, we're not the center of everything anymore. No, it's the ecosystem and the outcome that count. So it's my suggestion to you is that we focus with pathological intensity on these end-to-end pathways within the ecosystem. Content at source, the people and working with the tools that they work with to do their work are the source, through to content experiences that are enabled in the environments that people are doing their work. If you make those connections, everybody notices and the success spreads quite rapidly. I was going to say like a virus, but I'm not going to say that. So it's that time of year. My question to you is, where's my treat? And that is all, and all on time. And this is a previous example of one of my bald personas, but yes.
Joe, we will post the slides for both decks on your page tomorrow morning. So if you could make sure we get those, that would be great.
Okay.
All right. So